Good afternoon. My name is Bonnie Tam, and I'm the chair of the IAM Canadian chapter. Welcome to our first webinar for 2022, where we continue our conversation in the respective asset management journeys of organizations. Before we begin our webinar, I would like to share some updates with IAM Canada. This year, we're hoping to grow the IAM membership to include more members that are passionate about asset management. I will be meeting with all the local branch leaders across Canada to look at how we can generate more value to our members. We will also be focused on building out our knowledge pillar, as we know that most of our members benefit from best practices on maturing asset management. Also, I would like to share that there will be a new release of the subject-specific guides, or SSGs, that are in its final stages of review that will be released from IAM. Last year, we focused on asset management journeys as it seemed to be a very hot topic among organizations and also to relate to what some of the challenges and anticipated benefits are for them. Following today's webinar, we will be reviewing other themes to bring forth other interesting conversations with panels. We're also hoping to reinvigorate our in-person events in local branches, as we know that networking is so important for our members. We're aiming for mid to end of April to have that happen. Today, we'll be talking to leaders across Canada within housing and facilities to share their journeys within their respective organizations. In my experience, nearly all infrastructure asset-intensive organizations have facilities as an asset class, so it's going to be very relatable and interesting for many here today. Now, I'd like to introduce a fellow board member, Hans Kogel, who chairs events for IAM Canada.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and welcome to all. I would like to thank all of our sponsors who contribute to these events. Without their sponsorship and their commitment to these events would not be possible. And so I'd like to thank Planifica, Elevate Tech, Greenman Asset Management Academy, and also, oh, my apologies. I'm trying to navigate here. Let me try that again. Can you share my screen again there, Eric? That slide disappeared.
We can see your screen, Hans.
Oh, you can? Okay, I can't. Yep. My apologies. Okay, so I would like to thank all of the sponsors and for their commitment. Is the slide still showing? Because it's not showing on my screen.
Yep, it's still showing.
Okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how to eliminate it, or can you eliminate it? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. So the last sponsor I'd like to thank is Associated Strategic Advisory Services. And now I'd like to pass the mic on to two individuals who'll be providing, two sponsors who'll be providing some further information about their firms. Joe Catano from Practice, he's the Practice Director with Levitech Inc. And Shane Thompson, and Shane is the Manager of Strategic Advisory Services with Associated Engineering.
Thank you, Hans. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us today. We're proud to sponsor this event. Levitech is a solution provider for ERP, enterprise resource planning, enterprise asset management, and business intelligence solution. And we help enable, evolve, and develop and elevate your success. A little bit about me. I'm Joe Catano, the Practice Director for Levitech. Some of my work experience, I spent a little over 25 years in the world of maintenance and asset management with some supporting certifications to support that. In terms of project experience, little over 40 projects across North America and 30 different business types and little over 75 different asset classes. Some of the value that we bring to our customers are we're a local resource in Southern Ontario. extensive years of knowledge in maintenance and asset management, extensive knowledge in the project management space, and the people change management space in implementing enterprise asset management solutions. Leveltech is a Canadian company providing solutions for enterprise asset management, enterprise resource planning, and business intelligence. We're a proud channel partner of Infor and Hexagon PPM, and have spent over 10 years working closely with product development, product sales, product support, and consulting services to deliver sound solutions, value, and quality implementations. Our products that we focus on are Infor IAM in Enterprise Asset Management, Infor LN, CSIE, which is Enterprise Resource Planning, and Infor Burst, the business intelligence. We combine our enable, evolve, and elevate approach with our capabilities to help customers succeed in both commercial and public sectors, aligning their needs to the best solution and implementation. Our team and our ability, our practice is made up of a team of dedicated individuals who have over 50 years of combined experience and access to a network of resources that continue to grow. We continue to deliver that value with our approach to enable, evolve, and elevate. With the robust suite of Infor and Hexagon PPM products, we allow our practice SMEs, functional, technical, educational resources that have a broad experience in implementing these solutions across many business types, both commercial and public, with a deep customer portfolio that includes some well-known names in both the business and consumer realms. Our goal is to help grow your business with effective, efficient solutions. We take strategies, we develop solutions, we cultivate success, and we position those for sustainment. Analysis, vision, imagination, intelligence, experience, and industry knowledge are those key criteria that we bring to the table in our goal. Size and reach. We build valuable relationships with all customers. There's no customer that's too big or too small. We are in Canada, and we provide these solutions all across North America, and we have also provided them overseas in the UK and Denmark and different areas in Europe, and we've successfully delivered over 40 projects. Here's some of our industry experience. So certainly on your topic today with facilities and distribution and housing, and a big important space, public sector, infrastructure, institutions, education, and medical, things like hospitals and universities, food and beverage, process manufacturing, healthcare, personal care products, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, oil and gas, automotive, pulp and paper, steel and specialty metals, aerospace, chemicals, building products, industrial gases, transportation and construction, and manufacturing. Just some of our competencies and methodologies and standards that we leverage and we use in delivering those solutions that we do. A one-point methodology, a one-point implementation methodology, certainly the PMI standard, PMP, and Agile, ProSize ADKAR model in people change management, certainly the ISO standards of ISO 9000, ISO 55000, 5001, DWQMS and our water quality systems, the BOMA standards around facilities, certainly the PSAB around public sector accounting, HACCP, which are in the food area of hazardous analysis, critical control points, GXMP for pharma quality standards, and typically we leverage industry best practices and standards as they evolve. Some of our strengths, so our certifications, certified by the World Partners in Asset Management as a CAMA, the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals as certified maintenance and reliability professionals. Project Management Institute, our project managers are certified PMPs. ProSci, the ADKAR change model. Six Sigma with green belts in Lean for 101, 5S, value stream mapping, and lean manufacturing, and the Infor and Hexagon educational programs. We have instructors that are certified by the program, and our memberships and affiliations with AIM. Thank you again today for allowing us to sponsor and participate. World Partners in Asset Management, PMI, SMRP, and ProSci. And that's a lot about us. Again, thank you for allowing us to participate today and sponsor your event. If you are looking for a solution provider in any of the areas that I've spoken about today, we'd be glad to speak to you and help you down your journey of your project. Now back to you, Hans.
Thanks, Joe. Pass it off now to Shane.
Thanks. Everyone seeing my presentation fine?
Yep.
Okay, thanks very much for the opportunity to present today and to sponsor this event. We're Associated is a proud supporter of IAM and have been participating in these type of events for quite some time. So my name's Shane Thompson. I manage our Strategic Advisory Services group based in Calgary, Alberta. I've been with Associated for over 10 years and I have a combined experience of over 20 years now, really involved in the entire life cycle of asset management, from planning, delivery, management, operational and maintenance, and have a very strong interest and background in energy management and general strategic advice in supporting our clients for any challenges and needs that they may have. So Associated Engineering just celebrated its 75th anniversary last year. It was established in Edmonton. We now have over 1,000 employees across Canada, and we provide services in engineering, planning, delivery and construction, environmental services, as well as infrastructure management through our subsidiary ATAP. So why Strategic Advisory Services? As we all know, the world is rapidly changing. The pandemic has really brought this to the forefront and provided a basis for the evolution of a lot of extreme events, conversations around equity, changes to the economy, and impacts from climate change and extreme weather events. The risks and uncertainty are ever increasing and probably more significant today than they've ever been and will continue to be in the future. So we really look at that all hazards approach in terms of social, environmental, economic and infrastructure risk with the aim of providing fortified resilience and really reimagining value for our clients and communities that they serve. So why resilience fortified? So there's increasing pressures to become more resilient through vision and strategy, governance, integrated asset planning, value and level of service, sustainability and community-wide resilience, and risk-based decision making through that all hazards risk approach. And this is really highlighting the coordinated activities of an organization and communities in general to provide resilience. Value reimagined. I think everyone's heard of the term value lies in the eyes of the beholder and is defined under ISO 55000 as really that value in terms of a broader perspective and the services that are provided to communities. So there's increasing pressure to deliver value from a whole bunch of different perspectives in terms of governance, improved decision making, agreed levels of service, optimizing assets, balancing your operational maintenance, and incorporating sustainability and community resilience. So our approach to this through our strategic advisory services groups to fortifying resilience and reimagining that value is really to establish that trusted, collaborative and holistic approach to lay the foundation in exploring opportunities for improvement in resilience and realizing value through the organization's assets and services that they provide. It takes a strategic mindset, providing support and guidance across all stakeholders. And typically, we approach this through transparent, multi-criteria decision analysis that considers the broad range of risks and uncertainty that are present in today's challenges. So our team has a broad range of knowledge and experience, asset management, all climate subject matters of adaptation and mitigation, community resilience, energy, sustainability, environmental management, data management, which is becoming more and more important, and quality management. And we really have the conversation around investing in resilience now really ends up saving costs in the long term when compared to the potential costs of responding to risks in the future. Some examples of work and clients that we've performed over the last number of years include Parks Canada and Calgary Housing Company that are part of the panel discussion today. That we have some long-standing relationships there, and are quite proud of the work we've done with both of those clients being part of the session today. Also, as you can see, many municipalities and utility companies across Canada from a wide range of asset management strategies, asset management transformation initiatives, the focus on natural assets, climate and energy conservation. So we really acknowledge the rapid changing environment that clients are faced with, the increase in risks and uncertainty, to really help them look forward and become more resilient and realize value from the organization's assets and the communities that they provide their services to. So thanks again to IAM and all attendees today for your attention, and we're proud sponsor and supporter of this event, and I'd be happy to discuss any opportunities or questions you may have going forward in the future. So please feel free to reach out and contact me at any time. Thank you again.
Can you hear me, Eric?
Yep.
Okay, just asked me to unmute, so I was just questioning that. Hello all again, and I'd like to thank both Shane and Joe for their presentations. And of course, again, thank you for your commitment to sponsor this event. Moving on, I'd like to introduce a gentleman whom I got to know back a couple of years ago when the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association held their annual conference in Vancouver. The gentleman's name is Jeff Morrison. Jeff is the Executive Director of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. And Jeff is going to bring to us today just a very brief perspective on the housing situation across Canada. So thanks again for joining us. Appreciate your time here, Jeff, and the show is yours.
I hope, am I okay?
Yeah,
Great.
you're good now.
Perfect, thank you. So I was saying, thank you for the invitation to join with you today. I am joining you from the traditional Indigenous territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, which is otherwise known as Ottawa, where I saw a report yesterday that today happens to be the coldest day in 26 years in Ottawa. So really glad that I'm joining you inside. What I was asked to do today was really just to help provide a bit of context for the session today by providing an overview of the Canadian housing landscape and really sort of situate housing with, on respect to a spectrum and a continuum, which of course every person in Canada, every person everywhere fits somewhere on the housing continuum. But in doing so, also providing a bit of focus on that sector of the housing continuum that we represent, which is that below market or non-market housing sector. And I'll describe in a little bit more precisely what that is. And just before going on, I think one of the reasons why that's really important is, first of all, it's a part of the housing spectrum that, although it's relatively small in terms of the number of people in Canada who live in non-market housing, it's incredibly timely in terms of it's on the radar screen of governments, as we have seen with such things as the National Housing Strategy a couple of years ago, same with provincial and municipal governments. It's very much on the radar screen. And so as we talk in particular about asset management and where investment is to be made, the non-market portion of the spectrum, although small, is a very core part of what we think will be part of housing strategies moving forward. So just what I wanted to do today, very quickly, is again, provide a bit of that overview of the housing continuum, talk a bit about non-market housing, what it is, talk about some of the challenges of non-market housing, and then what's being done to address that. So again, you have a better sense of kind of that side of the spectrum of housing. Again, something that a lot of people are probably not as familiar with, especially compared to, say, market housing. So first of all, just to kind of provide the broadest overview of the housing continuum. Oh, sorry, before I do that, just by way of background in terms of who we are, as Hans mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. We are the national association representing nonprofit social affordable housing in Canada. I will say there are different terminologies that you might hear used: below market or non-market housing, community housing. In the United States, they tend to use the word public housing. It's all somewhat synonymous. There's some slight differences, but for the most part, they are somewhat synonymous. Our association, we have over 325 members, including nonprofit housing providers, municipalities, 12 of the 13 provincial and territorial governments, and other supportive individuals and businesses. So a bit of a big umbrella. And like most national associations, we provide federal level advocacy, research, networking, knowledge dissemination. One of our very important functions is we run an Indigenous caucus representing Indigenous housing providers. In fact, they're meeting as we speak to hopefully finalize an urban and rural Indigenous housing strategy. So a lot of functions that we do here. So getting back to what I thought I was about to talk about, which is really that overview of the housing continuum. So this this graphic here is one that CMHC has produced, and it's a pretty good illustration of the overall housing spectrum. And again, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you live, you are somewhere on this housing continuum. So as you see on the left-hand side of the diagram, sadly, there are a number of people in this country, as there is everywhere, who don't have a home whatsoever, who are homeless. We then move along to sort of the shelter and the transitional housing systems. We then move more into that non-market social nonprofit housing, which, as I'll talk about in a minute, is really designed to provide below market rents to individuals in need. There's a relatively small slice of the spectrum, the affordable rental and affordable home ownership sectors. And then probably the part of the spectrum that most of us are familiar with, which is market rental and, of course, market home ownership, where you go out into the market and actually purchase homes. This spectrum is not proportional to the actual number of people living across it. As you'll see here, Really, probably no surprise that the majority of people in Canada, if we start at the bottom of this slide, the majority of people in Canada are in market home ownership, about close to 70%. So that's really any of us who go out, sort of in that market buying homes in the private market. About a quarter of people in Canada are renters, so living in purpose-built or otherwise rental accommodations. As I mentioned, the community housing or nonprofit or social housing sector is relatively a small portion of the overall spectrum. Only about 5 to 6% of people in Canada are living in that sector, which represents about 600,000 units that we currently have of below market housing in the community sector. It represents the number of people living in there. We don't have a really solid number. It's over 1 million, but it's about, in terms of housing units, about 600,000. And then the latest estimate we have for people who experience homelessness at any point in a given year in Canada, although small in terms of proportion, less than 1%, I think we would suggest is high in terms of actual number, about 235,000 people in Canada who experience homelessness at any point in the year. And I think most of us would agree that in a country like Canada, especially on the coldest day in 26 years, that's something that many of us simply just don't find acceptable. So focusing in on, as I mentioned, on that non-market housing sector, and what is that exactly? Because it's something we hear sometimes as social housing, sometimes the affordable housing sector is used, non-profit housing, etc. What is it exactly? Well, really, housing, non-profit housing or social housing is housing where rents are set below market rates and usually tied to that person's income, what we call rent geared to income. Generally speaking, although not always, that threshold is that which is set by CMHC, which is generally 30%. CMHC usually defines a person living in what's called core housing need as someone who is paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So nonprofit housing generally sets a threshold of at about 30% of a person's income is their rent, which is below market for the most part. But that's the mandate really of non-market housing. Generally, that difference between a market rental rate and the person's ability to pay, where that 30% of rent geared to income level is, that difference is usually covered by government through a subsidy. Now, having said that, as the sector evolves, we're seeing less and less of government providing that, and more hybrid models are being developed. So, for example, we'll often see mixed models where you'll have some, in any development, you'll have some units that are market rent, some that are below market rent, and the market rents subsidize the below market. So it's an evolution that's happening, but typically, historically, it's government that provides that difference, that subsidy. And generally, historically, that subsidy was covered through what were called operating agreements, which were essentially agreements made generally by CMHC and then increasingly by provinces and individual housing providers. And essentially, those agreements were long-term in nature, 30, 40, 50 years, and essentially set out what the government would pay in order to maintain rent geared to income levels. Now, the unfortunate thing is that although these agreements were long-term in nature, they were established mostly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so they're actually beginning to expire. One of the reasons why we had that national housing strategy in 2017 was to address that problem of what happens when a housing provider goes off an operating agreement and therefore doesn't have the subsidy to continue to support people at the rent geared to income level. So subsidies in the strategy were extended at least another 10 years out to 2028. And just overall, non-market housing providers like groups like who you're going to hear from soon, Cliff at Ottawa Community Housing, their overall mandate is to make housing accessible. Frankly, if it were not for non-market or social housing, a lot of the tenants would frankly have no other choice. Homelessness would increase. There would be a lot of problems. So non-market or social housing is really a safety net for people that would otherwise not have access to basic shelter. And because that's their mandate, a lot of social housing providers also provide social supports, whether that's in the form of mental health and addictions, legal supports, primary health care, cultural supports. We see housing, for example, for Indigenous peoples, for LGBTQ peoples, for seniors, and so forth. So a number of really critical social supports go with the bricks and mortars. And that's frankly why I think social housing and nonprofit housing is incredibly special. So very quickly, challenges facing this sector. I mean, there are many, but just a couple critical ones. No question here, supply and demand. Of course, there is simply not enough supply to meet the demand for affordable non-market housing. And by the way, that has been exaggerated because of the cost of market housing. There's, being a spectrum, when something is critical or there's a problem on one side of the spectrum, it often cascades down the spectrum. So with high housing costs, both in terms of ownership and rental housing, it puts more pressure and more demand for affordable housing. And the fact is, there is simply not enough of it to meet that critical demand. And that's in part because access to capital has generally been difficult, although getting somewhat better with some new federal and other programs. Land availability is actually a critical concern and challenge, and something that we've been calling on the federal government to do more on. The other challenge non-market providers face, and this gets right to the issue of asset management, is just maintaining the existing stock of social housing. As I mentioned, there are about 600,000 units. There has been very little money made available to maintain those units at an acceptable rate, at an acceptable level, a livable level. So renewing the existing stock of social housing is really critical. Maintaining those subsidies, as I mentioned, that's really what makes non-market housing non-market. Is there is a subsidy made available to ensure that rents are affordable, but with operating agreements expiring and with a lifeline, if you will, of just 10 years, there really is a question mark as to how units can be maintained at an affordable level in the long term. Now, as I mentioned, there are some different models being tried, but ultimately that remains a question. There's really critical issues with human resource capacity. We just don't, there are not enough trained people in the sector to do everything we need to do. And lastly, there really are actually some challenges with NIMBYism. There are many communities and individuals who have concerns about social housing. A lot of it is probably founded on misinformation. And so oftentimes community opposition can be a critical challenge to getting new social housing development. But what are we doing about this? Oh, sorry. Nope. There we go. Well, first of all, CMHC has actually really changed its overall mandate and its objective. It actually has, as part of its vision statement that it adopted in 2018, that by 2030, every person in Canada has access to housing that is affordable and meets their needs. This is actually a new direction for CMHC. Their historic mandate had been home ownership, and that's why about 70% of Canadians, which is pretty high, are in that space. But now their new objective is somewhat different. So they are, as a national body, really reorienting themselves. I referred to that 2017 National Housing Strategy, which at the time was $40 billion. It's now closer to $70 billion with the new programs being added, and I think more to come in the federal budget in a couple months. These programs are increasing supply. They're designed to maintain the existing supply, address homelessness. So I could give a whole other presentation on the content of that strategy, but all that to say, the governments are waking up to the problems that this sector faces, and that many provinces and municipalities are doing similar things. And my last point here, there are new models, new programs that are being developed as we speak, both at a local level, and Calgary and Ottawa, who are on the call, may be able to describe some of their innovations. There's new land trusts that are coming on board. Ottawa, where I'm at, just announced a new land trust it introduced earlier this week. There's going to be a new $4 billion accelerator fund introduced in the budget in the spring that will help accelerate municipal approvals of housing. So we hope that will help. So there are a number of policies and programs being introduced, frankly, at all levels of government and by housing providers to address the many, many challenges that they face. Is it enough? Probably not. Will the demand ever go away for social or affordable housing? Probably not. But I will say this, and this is where I'll conclude, is that housing providers across the country, they are doing really heroic work, facing very limited resources, huge demands, and often with challenging issues faced by the tenants that they have. So I've often, especially during the pandemic, said, critical workers have been, really applauded by all of us, which they rightfully should be. But let's not forget the affordable housing providers. They've been doing very similar, critical and such important work as well. So with that, thanks for letting me have this chance to give that brief overview, and looking forward to hearing the rest of the. Oh, sorry, I did have one last slide, but I won't go into this very much. Really, just considerations for asset management is that no question we do need to have a better understanding of the existing stock of nonprofit housing in this country, and then how we, from that understanding, how do we use it to build and maintain the housing that we need. And there is going to be, as I say, a lot more money coming. We hope, we're confident of. So this is an important discussion to be having at this point. So there we go. With that, I thank you all for the time. And again, looking forward to hearing the discussion. Thank you. Merci.
Yeah, that would help. Thank you for that, Jeff. That was very interesting. So really appreciate the insight there. And, I've seen the housing continuum before, and it was great the way you presented it there. So I'm Owen James. I'm going to moderate the panel session here. Just before we get started, I'm speaking from Calgary. I'm based in Calgary, on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai nations, and also the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley nations, and also the Tsuut'ina Nation. Also just recognizing and acknowledging that Southern Alberta is also home to the Métis Nation of Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I appreciate that a lot of us are probably from all different parts across Canada. So I just want to acknowledge the people from across, the Indigenous peoples from across Canada, who have cared for these lands, and just acknowledge that it's given us an opportunity to host and share and collaborate on this webinar, but also live our lives and work and play every day. So thank you. Before we get into the panel discussion, I introduce the panelists. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. So we have, there should be a question box on the GoToWebinar. So if you want to ask a question, please put a question in there and we'll seek to bring it up. Eric, I'm hoping that you can help me monitor and review that. If you do need to cut into the conversation, please do. There is a chat box as well, which is separate. It'd be good if we could keep the questions in the question box, but also if you need to put chat in the chat box, we'll try and keep our eyes on that. So between me, Hans, and Eric, we'll do that. So let me introduce the panelists here. So going from west to east, got the pleasure of introducing Travis Wirt from Parks Canada, from the Alberta Directorate. So based in the mountain parks, Travis was the asset manager for, I think, Lake Louise, Yoho and Kootenay Park, but is now the SIR coordinator. I'll give Travis just a moment to introduce himself. The next panelist is Bo Jiang from Calgary Housing Company. Bo is the Vice President of Asset and Maintenance for Calgary Housing Company. So welcome, Bo. Then we have Debbie Martin. Debbie is the Assistant Vice President and Chief Facilities Officer for McMaster University. And lastly, but not least, Cliff Udale, Chief Development Officer with Ottawa Community Housing. So I think you'll appreciate that we've got a spectrum of different types of housing and facilities here. So it should be good for an interesting conversation. So I'm going to give Travis first dibs here. If you could introduce yourself, Travis, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your organization before we get into the questions. So you just got maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Owen. Hey, Brooke, can you hear me all right? There seems to have been some difficulties earlier on. Okay, great. So I've been in Parks Canada for 6 years. Prior to that, I spent 23 years in the Royal Canadian Engineers of the Canadian Army, where I had a very different role. In my 6 years in Parks Canada, a little bit of background on the portfolio, if you will, within the agency as a whole. Parks Canada has about $27 billion worth of assets across virtually all categories and types. My previous portfolio within the Lake Louise Yoho Kootenay Field Unit, which incorporated Kootenay National Park, Yoho National Park, and the northern half of Banff National Park here in the Rocky Mountains. We held about 2.7 billion of those assets, which of course included portions of the Trans-Canada Highway, some mountain parkways, two municipalities. Important to note that Lake Louise, Alberta, and Field, British Columbia, are actually Parks Canada administered town sites, as opposed to Jasper and Banff, which are actually municipalities within the province of Alberta, as of now. Within the last 6 years, I was the asset manager of that field unit, overarchingly responsible for that portfolio, alongside of capital delivery, maintenance for both front and backcountry assets, as well as managing the municipal works groups in each of those 2 town sites. Within our parks, much like in my former life in D&D, we do have staff housing, primarily located in each of those 2 town sites. Staff housing is used as a management tool within Parks Canada, just able to allow us to employ the people in the places we need to employ them. So it's a bit of an interesting take, certainly on some of the questions I'm sure will come up later, but looking forward to getting into those. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Travis. Bo, why don't you go next?
Sounds good. Just want to test out if you can hear me all right.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Bo Jiang. I am the Vice President for Asset Management and Maintenance for Calgary Housing Company. Calgary Housing Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the City of Calgary, and we're the asset stewards for approximately $1.5 billion worth of assets in the City of Calgary. And we manage that across 3 different portfolios from our province, the City of Calgary proper, as well as us as a wholly owned corporation. We have approximately 7,200 units that we manage in the affordable and social housing spectrum as presented by Jeff. We also take care of about between 12 to 15,000 rent supplements, and that's where the little extra differential between the rent geared income to market housing that's administered. My area of responsibility is the assets, so all things asset. We're responsible for, as they call it, the cradle to grave, or more professionally, the commissioning to decommissioning segment of the assets, and everything in between in terms of the operations and maintenance and capital renewals of those assets. So it's great work. I've been with the Calgary Housing Company for almost 2 years, but with the City of Calgary as a whole for nearly 8 years now.
Thanks for that, Bo. Debbie, if you could go next.
Hi, after almost 2 years remote, it's hard to imagine that I haven't done a GoToMeeting yet. So I spend my life on Zoom, so I'm having a hard time figuring this out, so my apologies. Anyways, yeah, Debbie Martin. I've been at MAC for almost 30 years, shockingly to me, and have spent the last 3.5 years or so in facilities management there. For those of you that aren't as familiar with the university, we're a large university, about 30,000 students, and between staff and faculty, we have about 15,000 employees of the university. So it's a pretty big place, 300 acres of real estate, and we have 66 buildings on site. About 13 of those are student residence buildings. So we do housing in a bit of a different way because it's student housing, and it looks a little bit different, but probably has some very similarities to stuff that other people are dealing with on the housing side. So we do have academic spaces, classroom spaces, housing spaces, and then other kind of support ancillary spaces for our students. So it's a real combination of everything. And we also have buildings that are outside of our campus proper. So we have this kind of 300-acre main campus, and then we have spaces in Burlington and in downtown Hamilton, and then 2 campuses, one in Waterloo and one in St. Catharines. So it's a pretty diverse portfolio, but I'm looking forward to having these conversations today. Thanks.
Interesting. No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Debbie. So Cliff, maybe if you could introduce yourself there.
There we go. All right, well, thank you. So Cliff Udale, and as mentioned earlier, with Ottawa Community Housing Corporation. So similar to Bo, we manage affordable housing. We have about 15,000 units, 32,000 individuals live in our units. You know, it's a pretty active file, and I think like a lot of the affordable housing across the country, the stock is old. The average age of our portfolio is now past 50 years. So there's been some real fundamental changes for us in terms of an asset management strategy. I think there's been a long history of patch and repair, without any strategic decision making or requirement for it. There wasn't really too many big decisions to make. It was just a matter of trying to round up the funding and get those repairs done. In the last 10 years, we really had to address some more strategic decision making as we started to look at redevelopment, rust out of buildings, and divestiture, in fact, and trying to reposition the portfolio. So it's a really interesting time to be in the industry, and we're doing what we can with our existing stock, which is mission critical. And as Jeff mentioned, a lot of our deep affordability comes in that old stock, and we desperately want to maintain that. That isn't going to come back with these RGI units. That was a historical piece that we hold on to dearly. I think it's deeply needed. But we also know that there's a huge amount of growth required, and we got to build new units, and we're actively doing that. So it's, I'm sure I speak on anyone in our sector. You have your feet in 2 camps. One trying to deal with their old and aging inventory, while you're trying to get more stuff on the ground. And again, also as Jeff mentioned, it's a great time to be in the industry. I came back to Ottawa Community. I worked there almost fresh out of school. I guess that'd be 30 years ago or something like that. And I spent a year or two when it was provincially owned, and it was I can say it now, it was kind of a hellish experience. It was very bureaucratic and very difficult, and reluctantly, got reintroduced into it, and it's just a totally different world for us. It's very dynamic. There's funding. It's we're able to really sort of move the needle on what can be done. So yeah, exciting times to be in the industry.
Cliff, there's no, I appreciate that introduction. I think that's great, and I think you've sort of started on, a good segue into our first question there. Somebody's asked on the panel, on the questions here, what's the average cost of a home? So I think this is probably Cliff or Bo. I anticipate that there could be some cost differences between East and West, but just curious, I think this is just about putting some context on what we're talking about when we talk about 15,000 units or 7,200 units. What is the average cost of one of these units?
Like to rent or for new construction?
I don't know. You can
Well, I can give you
both. Yeah, for sure.
I can give you both, and it'll be interesting to see how Bo does. But from his perspective, but in terms of the rent, for rent geared income, obviously it can be almost $100 if their income would support it, and it goes up to what we call our market rents, which would be significantly under a true market rent. So you might see a townhouse going for $1,200 or $1,300. So it's still affordable by anyone's standard, given where the market is. In terms of new construction and cost, I don't even think there's point floating a particular price out, because it's so variable on so many things. But one thing I always say is we don't build affordable housing. We build housing and make it affordable. So whatever it costs to build a townhouse, what it cost us, whatever it costs to build an apartment, that's what it cost us. There's not much of a difference in terms of the fit and finish on a condo is not that much different, that it really drives a lot of pricing. So the magic sauce in is the amount of funding we can put in front to get those rent structures down. So in Ottawa, probably $350 for an apartment these days, and $450 for towns, somewhere in that neighborhood. But whatever that is, it's probably 20% out from what it was last year based on inflation. So I'll hand it over to you, Bo.
Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, very similar answer. For us, we have a spectrum between the social housing, which again is the rent geared income, and those, I think for us, the lowest we go is about $150 is the low end, and those go up to the fixed rates, which is for us the low end of market, which is 90% of the market housing price based on CMHC's pricing for City of Calgary. So yeah, around $1,100-$1,200 it could be for a large 4-bedroom home in the inner city side. With regards to redevelopment, I'm more of a stakeholder in that rather than the actual individuals building it. But for us, our prices are usually around the 300 and 350,000. 300 is usually on the more mid-rise, so 3-4 story tall complexes, whereas the townhomes were around the 350,000 range for construction.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Cliff said, that could be 10 or 20% off based on the price of lumber that we've seen the last year.
Yeah, we're not talking about 3% price inflation. We're talking about 40-50% price inflation these days. No, that's great. Appreciate that. Okay, Hans, I don't know whether you want to kick off on some of these questions, or do you want to take the first one and then I'll follow up with you afterwards? You're on mute there, Hans.
Oh, okay. Thanks there, Owen. Yeah, absolutely. I'll take the first question. And since Bo and Cliff weighed in on that last question, I'll maybe start with Debbie, and ask the balance of our panelists. What are your key benefits that you hope to achieve in your asset management journey? And maybe you can just say a few words about that, and we will just kind of go through the panelists.
Thanks, Hans. So yeah, we've been at this for about 10 years as an institution, and I think before that, no one really knew what deferred maintenance was. So it still feels like it's relatively new on campus and still hard for people to get their heads around the amount of investment that's needed. For us, I think the kind of key benefit that we see is getting to a point where we're not just fixing critical systems. So we're still in a kind of reactive state and still fixing things as they break, as opposed to fixing them on some kind of a regular cycle and replacing things as it comes due. Mm-hmm. So we have, I think, overall reduced our physical infrastructure risk for the university, and that was a key goal of this when it started. And hoping to continue on that over the next several years, obviously, and really hoping to get to a point where we can start talking about preventive maintenance rather than deferred maintenance, which is a really big transition for us to, just get out of patching holes and fixing leaks instead of, preventing things before they even happen.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. Yeah, that's it's a position we wish we all were in, I think. So well said. Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would certainly echo that. Coming from like within D&D, we had a very robust, or certainly very mature, I think, at the time, asset management infrastructure. I used to think of the assistant deputy minister of infrastructure and environment as an impressive level of direction and policy. Then coming into Parks Canada, where the asset management culture is much less established. It's in its initial stages, and we're certainly making great strides. But with a lack of overarching policy and guidance, it made for an environment where different things were happening different ways, but for a multitude of reasons, and that takes away from your operational efficiency, your capital management, your asset management. Money well planned is money well spent, and when you're hemorrhaging money poorly spent in your capital environment, which is generally quite a bit greater than your operational environment, it can really hamper your operational sector. And where I think most of us are in the same boat, but certainly within public housing, I think your public housing is the mission, and your asset managing for your mission. Here in Parks Canada, we are very much an enabling activity. So if I don't, or if the asset management community doesn't do its job well, we really siphon money away from the operational community, and that's where delivering our Parks Canada mandate of visitor experience and natural restoration and conservation is important, and we certainly don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I think you're one of the, probably maybe the only one, maybe Debbie a little bit, but one of the only ones that have assets that are actually growing and increasing in size, whereas ours are fairly constant. So yeah, thanks for that, Travis. Cliff, what are your thoughts on some key benefits that you hope to achieve in your journey?
Yeah, I would say our big one is we've been at this for a while now, and first thing was sort of stabilizing some of the day-to-day operating, and then it was the capital repair side. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in that, I'd say, last third of life cycle for a lot of our buildings. So I think when we're right in the throes of it, our next step in the journey is to get really strategic about marrying our capital repair strategy with our portfolio management strategy. And it's a real sea change organizationally, because there's decisions to be made that didn't exist 20 years ago. If you had a roof leak, you replaced the roof. If you need a cladding job, you did the cladding. Now we're 25 years away from possible end of life. Do you do those repairs, or how do you position that building, and how do you effectively rust those out? So it needs a really, really strong portfolio management strategy, which means a committed build or replacement strategy to do with the capital repair. So you're making all those right decisions, or you're quickly putting good money after bad. So I think that's our next big step, and we're certainly putting a lot of work towards that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And certainly rusting out those buildings, as it sounds bad, but I guess rusting out those buildings is always a balancing act of you still need to have your places for people to live, but the buildings are aging, and it's a matter of strategically allocating the limited funds that you have. Really is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, our comms person doesn't support the rust out terminology, and
yeah.
So
I can appreciate that. That's an asset management term. Bo, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny because I think Cliff and I were very much in the same stage of our organizational change. We are in the midst of what we call our Transform Calgary Housing, and it says, I think Jeff mentioned that hybrid model that we're moving towards, where the 70% of the near market or low end of market housing is going to be supporting or subsidizing the rent geared income, the social housing side. And in order to do that, we need to make sure our assets at a level of condition and level of service that the market people would see it as near market housing. I really like your phrase, Cliff, that we don't build affordable housing, we build housing that's affordable, and that's truly where we're going. And as part of that, one of the main things we're doing is that portfolio management, global perspective, and we're actually just right in the midst. I have a meeting right after this to talk about our real estate strategy on determining what the true costs and operating costs and potential of our various sites, from redevelopment, renewal, disposition, and which properties we want to pursue, and which properties we want to run to the end of life, as we call it, on our end. So that's very much the asset management strategy and asset management plan for us is to have that true understanding of how much it costs to operate and find the efficiencies that previously we just didn't have the time, nor money, nor energy to take a look at. And it is really exciting to be in this sector right now because we have the time, we have the resources, and we have the ability to make those long-term strategic decisions. Because similarly, our assets predominantly are, the 50, 55, 70-year range, and some of our buildings are, 10 years beyond their end of life, truly. And we've just been patching it for a long period of time, and really understanding what our options are. And that's our primary mandate for our asset management strategy within this corporation.
Great. Oh, thanks, Bo. I'll hand it over to you for the next question there, Owen.
Sure. So the next one here, there's some sort of hints in some of the conversation that you provided just now, but it would be interesting to understand what some of the key challenges are that you've gone through in your journey. You talked about the benefits. What about some of the challenges, some of the issues, some of the difficult things? And, as we know, the more we get into this asset management game, the more we find out it's maybe not quite as simple as perhaps what we thought it was. I'm going to put the question out there, maybe to you, Travis. You were the asset manager, which to a certain extent was a little bit of an operational thing. I know that there's been organizationally different departments doing different things. I'd just be interested in what your take is on how Parks Canada, what some of the challenges you've faced and how you've potentially addressed some of those challenges. So Travis.
Yeah, I don't know if this is one that's on the top of everybody's mind, but it's something that I find core to the difficulties we have in Parks Canada. That is the recognition of asset management as a formal discipline. As a formal discipline with rules, with phrasing and things that terms, that actually mean something. We have 36 operational business units in Parks Canada, which means we have a minimum of 36 asset managers from an entire, from a wide variety of backgrounds and disciplines. But in terms of asset management training, like core functional and institutional asset management training or level of knowledge, I think is really lacking. And I think asset management as a whole, as a discipline, I think needs to make that point. I think IAM and other national asset management bodies to go out and make sure that it's understood to be a well-defined discipline, so that when people are speaking in asset management terms, they are meaning the same thing. But certainly from a corporate context, with asset management being, say, 10 years old, if I'm being generous, probably within Parks Canada, it's always existed. Infrastructure management has always existed to some extent, but asset management, as is being codified now, the understanding of that at my level compared to the understanding of that at a corporate level, I think would be vastly different. And I think, like I know in D&D we had to do a joint realty and asset management course before we were allowed to touch infrastructure. I see a lot of asset managers being onboarded, not just within Parks Canada, but elsewhere in the public sector. Being onboarded and learning what asset management is once they're in the seat. And if that's happening at the coalface, you can imagine the lack of understanding, at a corporate or national or regional, regional environment.
Yeah, that's good, and I totally hear you. I've had a lot of challenging conversations with my colleagues around, what is this gig called asset management? And for some people, we close it down, and for others, it's a big thing. So I totally appreciate that. That's the challenge. Debbie, with excuse me, McMaster University, I think similar kind of timeline. You'd sort of indicate around 10 years that McMaster has been at this game. What are some of the sort of challenges that you've experienced or that you're aware of with the university there?
Yeah, so when I think there's kind of two here. One would be just people getting their heads around the magnitude of this. So, for us, our backlog for deferred maintenance is about $730 million, and people just shut down. It's like it's too big of a number, and it almost seems like you can't ever get there. So it's kind of rate limiting just in the sheer scope of it and the magnitude of it. And then for us, like I think a lot of you, we never stop. So this is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year operation. When I first started working at a university, somebody that I know really well thought that that meant I got every summer off. And in fact, the universities are quite busy in the summer, and not just with our own students, but with events. And we fill up our student residence buildings in the summer with events and people coming to do camps and training programs and lots of different activities and events happening all year round. So for us, trying to find time when buildings are empty or when we can actually do system work in spaces without negatively impacting research, negatively impacting students who are living there, just trying to coordinate it, it's very challenging. So even though, you know, we've really made a commitment to spend a certain amount of money every year on deferred maintenance, sometimes it's hard to spend it because we can't get into spaces and we can't shut down spaces in order to spend. So I mean, spending is not usually a hard time, but executing it can be really, really sensitive.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you raised a good point there, Debbie. Cliff will know this because I know he faces it too. Is that one of the exercises in the housing sector that's done? One of the major projects is a deep energy retrofit, and typically those are done on existing buildings. And yeah, Bo, you'll know that too. I see you nodding. And they're not existing buildings, I should say, occupied buildings. And that's the same thing as you're trying to accomplish, you know, a major facility improvement while activities are going on in the building. So I share, you know, I sympathize with those that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have heard of that before, certainly in the affordable housing sector, that making the most of those tenant changes, those sort of windows, is kind of critical. But Bo, why don't you go next and talk to us about some of your key challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the key challenges that we're starting to go over the hill, or go over the hump, as you call it, is data. Is good, meaningful, accurate data to understand where we sit. We just recently changed our software system to Yardi, migrated from JD Edwards, and just the functionality of being able to do detailed analysis in terms of costs, in terms of what kind of costs are actually associated with the maintenance and capital renewal of a program. Or the individual cost of our operating and cost for plumbers, for example. Things like that, that now we're able to find a certain level of intelligence to be able to make more strategic decisions. So thankfully, that was a major stumbling block in the last 2 years, but now we're getting to the point where we're a little bit more, I won't say sophisticated, but a little bit more, you know, smart as we proceed in that side. And I think even thanks to Associated for us in terms of our base foundation for asset management strategy, having that foundation set and understanding where we want to go was important for us, and that allowed us to really find where the shortcomings were and try to address them on a priority basis. So there's a lot of still stumbling blocks, but I think the biggest for us celebration is that we know what those stumbling blocks now are, and now we can actually address them. Whereas before we didn't even know what we didn't know. So that was probably the biggest challenge for us.
That's good. Yeah, and I think data is that sort of universal challenge. We got more of it today than we've ever had in history, and yet we still throw stones at the quality of the data and information that we have. So, Cliff, everybody else has gone first, so we're going to get something amazing from you. No pressure.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, I struck my list off as people went through, so I'm down to 7 and 8. No, so I took 2 items. One is I think there's a fundamental challenge that I've seen in my organization, and probably true of everyone on this table, is I always feel that capital subsidizes operating. You can defer capital, but you can't defer your day-to-day operations, and it could be staffing, it could be HR, procurement, other departments. So when we do our budgets, it's really easy to push capital. So I think most organizations, the capital repairs gets underfunded. at the expense of operating. And I did a lot of work in the condo industry before, and they have reserve funds, and you had to have funds tucked away before you put money into your day-to-day operating. So you have to secure that asset. And it would be good to see some expectations or industry standards that define that this is a reasonable set aside to support capital repair based on age and vary, but having it a little bit more solidified so that someone at a table can understand that if you do not do this, you are underfunding and you're betting your future. So that was one, and the other one is strategic decision making, and I think it's probably the Canadian experience with most of our infrastructure having been built in the last 50 years. I don't know what the number is, but I bet you 80% of it has been built in the last 50, 60 years. We've been living the honeymoon period from an asset management standpoint because we're in that first half life cycle, first 2/3. So I think we're entering collectively into a different era, and I know I can say firsthand within our organization, reasonably sophisticated board, they weren't equipped for some of the decision making that they had to make, and it's been a journey to get them to move along. So the sale of a single family home was something they never had to face because you only just acquired assets, you never sold them, right? It was just we came from that world, and now we're having to make those kind of decisions, and it was really hard. And we're progressing, and those decisions are becoming easier. That's a huge challenge.
That's interesting, and yeah, that idea, that sort of wall of investment that is approaching, it almost sounds a little bit doomsday-ish, which puts some sort of resistance into that message. But I do kind of wonder, and I hear you that we've had this massive boom period, and today we're starting to see the beginning of the sort of, I guess, the replacement cycles on that boom investment from previously. And just to your point there around capital and operating dollars, we've kind of all been in this world of accountants, and we use those accounting terms, and it's driven our whole philosophy and the way we think about things, and we put dollars into those buckets. And while they're useful on the one hand, I think they do tend to get in the way with the funny games that we play between capex and opex. There's a little bit of a trend now for thinking about TOTEX, which is that total expenditure need, and let's truly understand those total expenditure needs in the decisions that we're making, rather than breaking things down into these capital and operating buckets. But no, I think that's a great one, and I completely hear you, some of the challenges that those terms introduce. Hans, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. So this question's more aimed at you folks as panelists, kind of sharing your experience with, if you had to do it all over again or start your asset management journey again, what would you do sort of more, what would you do more of or different? It's hopefully some tidbits of information that those that are starting out their asset management journey could glean from the panelists to just to learn from that. So maybe Travis, you could start on that one and just share a little bit about if you had to do it again, what would you do more of or different?
I suppose that this has already been touched on, but I suppose my 6 years here within Parks Canada, every decision we make, every funding request that we try to defend, all goes back to our data integrity. And coming from a position where I was in charge of plumbers, I was in charge of trail maintainers, I was in charge of wastewater operators, and I was in charge of capital program, the capital plan and the execution of the capital plan. I think spending the resources on data integrity at the very beginning, because until you get your data house in order, none of your other decisions are they're the best decisions you can make. but you're making them on top of a house of cards. And then when you try and defend it, certainly like within the public sector, when you're trying to defend Treasury board submissions or whatnot with that data, it's difficult to secure funding. It's difficult to accurately plan. So spending the resources on data integrity at the forefront of whatever situation you're falling into, making sure that that's at the level it needs to be before you make any other decisions. I think that's what I would do. That's where I would throw resources with a lot more vigor. Could I had a chance to do it again.
Yeah, well said, Travis. And it's not only dollars, resources, it's also time. So the sooner, and I learned that the sooner you can start down that road of pursuing that solid data integrity, the better. Thanks, Travis. Go to you, Debbie. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually went back to our staff and asset management to ask them about this because I wasn't kind of here at the beginning when we started down this journey. So, and what they've said is that we're in the process of launching sustainability strategy for the university, and we've been doing a lot of sustainability work over the last couple of years. And if they could kind of go back and do it all over again, they would integrate that sustainability planning work with the asset management work. Because what's happening is we're now having to go back and relook at some of the things that we've already done kind of through that sustainability lens. It likely would have been more expensive at the time, but it would allow us to do things kind of one and done rather than go through it and then have to go through the process again. So, it's having that crystal ball. I don't think there was definitely the same focus on sustainability initiatives 10 years ago as there is now, but now we're really trying to make sure that all of our new initiatives kind of go through that process at least of thinking through sustainability before we move ahead.
Yeah, it's a very good point. You're thinking more of an integrated solution.
Exactly.
Had you had that mirror to look backwards.
Yeah, wouldn't we all love that?
That's right. Bo, what are your thoughts?
I would say Travis and Debbie took my thunder because those were the 2 points I would say for sure that you already need to consider: the integrated approach and data. I guess for as a third one to consider is making sure that everyone within the organization understands what the future pursuit is. So we've had a lot of, I won't say misunderstandings, but a difference of opinion on what our mandate and our goals are. And as such, there's differing priorities in terms of how we maintain our assets and what types of assets we maintain to a higher level or lesser level. And really to have that understanding cohesively throughout the organization. And I would say that's more of a leadership prerogative that the senior leaders in the organization set that vision and is clearly understood throughout the rest of the organization, so that when something happens, when something we want to go some way, everyone understands this is the right way, and they move step by step with it. We've had a lot of issues in terms of capital spend, to be able to just spend money, just spend the capital, but not really taking the time to understand why we're spending the capital and whether this is the best use of money. And there's a lot of disagreement on that, and so people hold things up and not do the things they're supposed to do. So things like that, I think it's probably the third edition, trailing far behind what Travis and Debbie said in my mind.
Yeah, no, well taken, no, well spoken. That's a good point. Cliff, what are your thoughts?
Well, maybe a little bit of a different tact. I think you were there for this, Hans, but this was, I don't know, probably 10 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago. We saw a presentation, and it was a UK, extremely large housing provider in the UK, and the guy was up in Toronto, and he said something that really stuck with me. Now that was pretty profound. And he goes, our business line changed the minute we stepped away, and I love this term, from being grant-entrepreneurs. We sort of went on to explain, it totally made some sense, was that they didn't have a really strong strategic direction. Whatever funding was becoming available was what they did next. And he goes, there was a conscious decision to go, no, we're going to have our roadmap, and this is our future, and this is where we need to go. And if the money lines up, we'll take it. But we can't do course corrections every year to chase whatever the flavor of the month is. And we were 100% guilty. It was responding to RFPs, that were not necessarily core business line. We were doing seniors housing. We were trying to get solar panels. We were bouncing all over the map, and we weren't driving the bus, is what it felt like. And our development activity, and we were able to scale it up dramatically the minute we stopped. We stopped doing RFP. We said, okay, we'll drive the bus. And so I guess that speaks to, once we did that, it started us down the ability to implement roadmaps and have that long range vision that worked for us, and maybe not as politically driven. So yeah, if I had to do it all over again, I'd certainly take that advice, and I wish I'd got it like 5 years earlier and implement it for sure.
All right. No, well said. And just on the new development side, I'm sure you'd agree that speaks to resourcing and positioning yourself, that when that funding comes along, you've got those what we call shovel-ready projects, right?
Absolutely.
How many times have we probably all missed opportunities because haven't had those and haven't had that strategic direction that you've just talked about as an organization, rather than just floating from one funding program or opportunity to the next. So yeah, very, very well said.
Okay, no, that's good. So I'm going to cut from the standard questions. There's a couple of things here in the chat that it would be interesting just to hear on. And these are relatively technical questions. One is on facility condition index, and let me just look at it. How are you evaluating and reporting the condition of your portfolio's FCI, EFCI financial needs from a BCA model or a different sort of physical type? So I'd be interested, maybe Bo, is facility condition index something that you use, and how do you use it? Or you talked earlier on about having a better handle on data and having that better information. How do you use some of these metrics like FCI and so on?
For sure. So from the facility condition index, we really utilize that as a feed-in model to the City of Calgary's corporate asset management. For us in CHC specifically, we take a very more prominent look at our building condition assessments and how those work. That being said, on the operational side, we have our own separate unit condition assessments or unit condition index to ensure that we understand how the individual units are operating, making sure that they're meeting the minimum health standards at a bare minimum, but oftentimes to have that option to take a look at which ones are deteriorating on a building specific basis, so we can look at more long-term capital plans to do occupied suite renovations on an entire building basis. So those are the, we use it all in terms of data that with FCI, unit condition index, and BCA.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to ask it as an open question to whoever wants to respond. Travis, Cliff, or Debbie, are any of you able to talk to that use of things like FCI and BCAs?
I can certainly touch on the FCI actually, because just prior to, well, maybe 5-6 years prior to my arrival in Parks Canada, they had actually set FCI as the sole I guess informer of the overall asset condition. So if your FCI was below 5%, it was you were good. If it was 5 to 15, you were fair. I think 15 to 30 was poor, and more than 30% of deferred work, related to your CRV was very poor. The the benefit of that is that it gives you a black and white, indisputable assessment of that asset, of the performer, or I should say the state of that asset. What it doesn't do really particularly well is cover the level of service aspect. So if you have a 2-lane highway, I'll use the Trans-Canada as an example in your whole national park. When we repave it, its FCI goes to 0. The fact that it needs to be 4 lanes isn't captured. So the level of service is greatly reduced, and then the ability to to seek that funding, to look at an asset and say it is performing below its required level of service is greatly reduced. So it's certainly a great tool, and obviously it requires assessments and inspections. Obviously a regulatory inspection regimen to make sure that your FCI is accurate. But having that somewhat subjective level of service coupled in with that overall asset condition is imperative in order to ensure that you're meeting your level of service obligations.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's funny, we have these metrics that we want to review across the board, but sometimes then they help us to compare, but they're not necessarily always as insightful as perhaps what we really need.
Yeah, and we use FCI, but we, like the others, just use it as one marker. So it is one thing that we watch, but it's not the deciding factor. There's lots of other things that we kind of put into the mix, including just boots on the ground and what people are seeing in buildings. It's there. We report on it every year. Our board likes to see it, but I don't know that we put that much weight into it. It really is just kind of one thing that we're kind of in the background that we're monitoring.
Okay, no, that's good. Cliff, I'm going to give you a different question. So
Sure.
Just while you thought about FCI, I'm going to ask you about risk. Is that something that you talk about and manage and monitor with the Ottawa housing portfolio?
Well, I guess it's a pretty broad term. So yeah, for sure. We have risk registries for pretty much everything we do. Certainly on the capital repair side, new development, and even on the operating side. And just in our environment, there's I guess everyone's environment, there's the obvious risk mitigation around, life safety and those types of ideas. So they prioritize. So yeah, risk mitigation, key factor. We do discuss it. We do present on our board to it. I think the reporting up at a board level, is a check in the system. I'm not sure how effective it is because we would never let any meaningful risk get up to the board. It gets addressed long beforehand. That's how you retain your job.
Yeah.
But no, we do keep a pretty close eye on it.
Good to hear. To any of the other panelists here, do you have there is that sort of strategic, if you like, that sort of corporate risk dialogue, that corporate risk discussion? Do any of you use and treat risk differently?
I can go from CHC's perspective. I'm not sure if we treat it differently. We take a very risk-focused approach in how we approach our maintenance and operations. One of the few that we're dealing with right now, obviously, is the climate change aspect. This past summer, it was the first time I think we had 3 consecutive weeks of 35-degree plus weather for a city that, when I was growing up here, I think we might have had 2 days a year, maybe, if we're lucky. And then, they will cool down to a certain extent and then be warm back up to 30 degrees over another 2-week period. It's something that we have to take in very long-term consideration in terms of our building envelope, how we want to retrofit buildings to accommodate for climate change. Certainly also, I'm sure you guys have heard in the news, 2013, the large flood in the city of Calgary. Several of our buildings are within the floodplains in the areas that we need to take care of our operational needs in terms of emergencies. How do we manage our major HVAC and emergency backup systems to mitigate those risks and eliminate if possible? Another interesting one that we're considering, maybe it's not a risk, but it's a consideration, is the area of equality, inclusion, and diversity in how we retrofit buildings and how we retrofit units, and not necessarily just retrofitting back into the standard 2-bedroom, 1 bath in the kitchen model, where we're looking at different communities that are more focused on living with larger families together or more gathering-based units. So to have that diversity, inclusion, and a focus in terms of how we think about our retrofits has been something that been considered. And I don't think it's a risk per se, but I think it's a consideration that we really should be looking forward to as we plan for the next 10, 20, 30 years as we move forward.
Yeah, that's good. And it's helpful to think about risk and opportunity in in the same sort of spectrum. And I think when you're talking about that equity, diversity, and inclusion, there's definitely key opportunities in there. And yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. That was great. The next question I'm going to throw out here again, back onto the more higher level asset management questions, is organization. How is your organization structured to manage asset management, or to manage your asset management team? Is it like a one-man band? Is it a team of you, or how do you manage that? So Travis, I'll put that out to you first.
Yeah, I'll talk about this. Parks Canada is actually, so corporately, the agency is undergoing quite a big shift right now in terms of how we manage assets from a corporate aspect. And as we all are well aware, asset management kind of being dependent on the financial strengths. So Parks Canada is undergoing a shift in our financial processes now into like accrual-based investment planning, which is going to create a new operating model in our corporate, kind of in our corporate functions of chief financial officer, director, and our strategy, or our vice presidents of strategy and policy, and of course in the upper reaches of our vice president of investment, which is where our kind of our asset management, I could say, corporate body sits. So so to that level, it's going to be writing new policies and the new guidelines to basically match Parks Canada's asset management functions, roles, and responsibilities in line with Treasury Board's direction, on behalf of the government of Canada as a whole. Down at the field general level, like I say, when I was in Lake Louise-Yoho Kootenay as the asset manager, I had about 65 staff. Well, it's 65 FTEs. So when we'd be swelled up in the summer, we'd have quite a bit more staff in the summer doing seasonal backcountry maintenance. And again, that was split between capital delivery, a team of 5 engineers, a full set of trades, municipal works, roads, grounds, all those regular things, that you would expect to see in a small municipality, really. The one thing that was really void, and we could never get funding for, was the planning staff. I was doing HR management, finance management, while trying to manage, matching our capital asset or capital plan to our kind of strategic objectives, or our 10-year park management plans for the 3 parks, with which we were managing, within which we were managing. So, it's that planning portion, which is really what we're all talking about. It's a critical thing. All those things that we didn't do, the data verifications, the appropriate costings, the funding, the inspections, to really get an idea of where we stood, essentially defaulted us into that, hitting that closest alligator to the boat, like what you were talking about, Cliff, with regards to always going, always just being funded for what's closest to you and always changing course, which of course, as you know, it's an inefficient way to manage. But I'm optimistic that we're kind of headed out of those murky waters now, and that's yet to be seen, but I'm optimistic.
I appreciate that, Travis. Thanks. Cliff.
Yeah, I think pretty standard. We have 3 pillars. We have directors that head up each group. So there's a director of asset operations, director of capital repair, and I guess, well, with the growth, we have now 2 directors on the new development side, one for planning and one for construction. So I think pretty standard. We're pretty much an outsourced shop, so we're pretty much comprised of technical people. So a lot of engineers and architects, and not too many tools within the team. We did in the past, and we've gone to an outsourced model for that type of work. I guess the things we've sort of fine-tuned over the last little while, we saw our Achilles heel was really in procurement. It's a pseudo-public agency where we're getting killed in terms of time frame to turn out procurement. So we brought a lot of that procurement in-house, so there's a check-in system, because we do have an external procurement, but we do line share the work, so we can be pretty quick on that. Because I guess the biggest thing we try to drive in our structure is we found a lot of conflict because of, like a better word, like sort of operational cadence. We were that's use all work. They'll say that we're always in panic mode, and we're coming back, whether it be comms, HR, or procurement. We need quick turn. So we've tried to really drive a structure that allows us to do that, align, share that work inside, so that we can manage our requirements, which sometimes come quick and fast because we're trying to respond to limited time, funding, and sort. So I think it's a fine tuning the structure, but I think pretty standard.
Yeah, no, it sounds pretty good, and I like the way that you've talked to a whole variety of different functions like supply chain and procurement and so on. And it sounds like, one of the biggest challenges is actually not working in organizational silos. And, it's really encouraging hearing you there that it sounds like, there is a lot of collaboration across what would traditionally be different silos and disciplines. Skip across to you, Debbie. How are you organized? How are you structured to manage asset management and your asset management team?
Yeah, thanks. So we do have a manager who's kind of an N of one who heads our team, but it's really, just to go back to your previous comment about this needing to be coordinated, that person does really work closely with our design and construction group, which is all of our project managers and project directors for all of our big capital projects on campus, our maintenance team, our utilities team, our grounds team, our residence team, our finance team. So that person is kind of the glue that holds everything together. They help us with a lot of the behind the scenes planning and help works with those groups to prioritize projects, kind of get them off the ground, and then they move over to the relevant team to execute the project. So I would agree that coordination piece is so important. We heard some examples in my early days in this role where, we'd have our custodians go in one night and strip and polish a floor, and the next day somebody would come in and rip the floor out because they were doing other work. So, as much as we can coordinate in-house what's happening, and the timing around when things are happening is important. So this one role for us is really, really critical in doing that.
Okay, no, good, yeah. It sounds like a bit of a linchpin in the organization there. Bo, what about yourself in terms of how within Calgary Housing Company you're organized?
Yeah, that's as I mentioned earlier, we are just on the tail end of a reorganization where we brought all things asset under one umbrella, where previously it was spread across 3 separate areas. And it's funny, Debbie, you mentioned about the flooring. Like one of the first things I heard when I came into this organization was, 1 week the maintenance guys had to go fix our furnace, found it was broken and replaced it. A month later, our capital team went in and replaced the furnace with the next set of capital plans. So that coordination absolutely was one of the major driving factors of where we wanted this asset focus to be under one area of accountability, so that there can be that coordination and integrated approach to asset management. In terms of the asset planning and the data analysis, we have a dedicated group within Calgary Housing Company. We call them Asset Management Division, and it's a team of 6 people. So it's a relatively large team overall compared to the organization of our size. And that was intentional because we truly wanted to make asset management a priority, a focus, and to have the necessary skill set and human resources to do the work necessary. So we prioritize that and ensure that was integrated within our team. And as others have mentioned, there's asset management reporting and detailed responsibilities across the rest of the operations and maintenance and capital delivery teams, that they need to have that pretty close relationship and conversations in terms of reporting back to the asset management lead, so that they're, as best as possible, we're not having circumstances where things are overlapping and missing things.
Appreciate that, and interesting that two of you have talked about major organizational change, and I think that's one of the constants in life, that we go through these changes. But interesting to see how that influences this, whether we slice and dice this game of asset management, and it seems to pulse from one one form of organization to another. So yeah, no, a great insight there. Hans.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. So this question, we've been really focusing on you sharing your experiences, you sharing your thoughts on asset management, based on the organizations, particularly the organization that you're currently with. This question is more directed at, more if you had a wish, how could organizations like the IAM, the Institute of Asset Management, help you in your journey? What things could be done to assist with your asset management journey and ultimately, result in greater success within your organizations? So maybe Cliff, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, it wouldn't. My experience is that the best thing that groups like this can do is bring people together. I think back, over the years, the presentations versus the coffees, I'll say it, after a session or just connecting with people over lunch. It's always those connections that you get your best nuggets from. And there's other good stuff in the seminars and events, but it's the people that you get to connect with. And events like this, I think are the things that you're really learn from. So I get like-minded people together. With COVID, obviously everything's been so much more complicated. So look forward to getting back to it. But I think that's the single biggest thing. And the one is sort of more practical, sort of day-to-day activity. I think there's going to be a certain number of challenges that are going to be collected at the industry that are new, that are coming our way, right? Like I think that someone touched on, carbon neutrality and sustainability. And everyone's going to be facing that. So I think some type of suggested roadmaps or research that would help people on those new and changing dynamics would be super helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Those are common problems that we're all going to face. Carbon emission reduction, for example, in housing or in our facilities in general, in our organizations in general. So how is that going to happen? Good point, Cliff. Travis, what are your thoughts on how organizations like the IAM could assist you in your journey?
Well, Cliff kind of stole mine, but as I have no imagination, I'm just going to double down and expand a little bit. I'll use it in I'll use the term community of practice. Establishing, being able to be at the center, the nexus or the hub or whatever you build of a spoke wheel, to be able to propagate that information, that understanding of asset management. As I spoke about, the lack up and down in an organization, but making sure that cross organizations, whether it be public or private sector, making sure that community, being able to establish and foster that community of practice, so that if you're in British Columbia, where I am right now, and you need to talk to somebody in Timmins, Ontario, about asset management, when you go and reach out to that person, you're talking pretty much the same language. That just helps. That helps foster that baseline understanding. And as Cliff touched on as well, it's being able to have a resource to go and get to, whether it be like a resource library or a resource of people, resource of ideas. Being able to reach out and consult that where this expertise may lie, and have it at arm's reach is a fantastic benefit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. That's that network that we can communicate with and share our asset management, particular hot issues with, or our journey with, is you're absolutely right, Travis. That's paramount. Good points. Thank you, Debbie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm like a lot of things. I think you learn so much just by talking to other people, and everyone's already covered this, but so much of this is about networking and learning from other people's journeys, whether it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we've all been there. We've all, encountered pitfalls along the way. And it doesn't seem to matter what area you're in. I mean, I'm hearing the same challenges with housing that I'm hearing with universities, public, private sector. I don't know that it matters. I think that a lot of this, we share commonly what some of those strategies could be. And the only other thing for me really would be support for those people who are on the ground. So some of those project staff, some of those asset managers, and really making sure that they can connect in with others and learn from others, others' experiences. So much of it for me is just networking and connecting in. So this has been a great opportunity for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Bo?
Yeah, ditto to what everyone else said. I think the other side in terms of organizations like IAM is perhaps, I want to say, the advocacy side, bringing up the importance of asset management across the industry in terms of infrastructure management. I think we talked about before, 10 years ago, most of us were just in infrastructure management. We managed day-to-day reactionary aspects, and the concept of asset management truly should be percolating up higher and higher as we move to the future, because it needs to be done. Otherwise, we are at the end of the honeymoon stage for our infrastructure. Things need to be happening on a much more strategic, well thought out basis. And to be able to elevate the importance of asset management across the industry, I think it's a role that this organization can take a lead on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Owen, just checking in to see if we had any more questions from the audience. Or
there is another question there. It is another relatively technical question, but I think it's kind of interesting. So, as we go into the future, we see new technologies, new materials, and the use of those new materials, it means that we need to change some of our assumptions. So it's my question and interpretation of this is it helping? Because now all of our, if a building is constructed of concrete, bricks and mortar, we know how bricks and mortar work, but when we start getting new materials and things like that, it creates a lot of uncertainty. So just curious, in terms of the way, and the question is particularly around materials usage, but what about technology usage and so on? It almost creates its own uncertainty into the future. So I don't know if anybody's willing to comment on that or able to comment on that. Is it helping or is it not?
Well, so one commentary. I think there are a couple categories, like the building material side is kind of interesting one, and it's a tough one to manage, right? As you go through, because you don't want to be the bleeding edge and be the future, starter of lawsuits for failed materials, right? And there's lots of history on that one, so we're always trying to balance it. But I can say in our sector, there's one thing that's it's kind of interesting, and I really believe this is we in the housing industry, every product that I would say virtually every product that you buy is based on the private sector's requirements, which is pretty much condo and new apartments, which have very short life cycle. So they're trying to get maximum value. So the cabinets that you can purchase, the lighting, the doors are intended to look good, provide high value for that first period, because that maximizes their profits, but not really, they're not sustainable, and probably total cost of ownership is higher. So, from our standpoint, we almost feel like some of the products out in the market aren't really geared towards products that we need. So I think as an industry, we have some objectives. We've done it with, kitchen countertops, or kitchen cabinets, and we've driven a different standard, and we're pushing it because they don't exist in the marketplace, and I'm hoping that we can do more of that. But the single biggest challenge I think out there on the material side, if you want to use that term, is the technology, and it's just changing so dramatically that we're, and having smart buildings and positioning ourselves, it probably, in the commercial industrial sectors a lot further along, but residential, like we're just getting up to speed, but it's happening, so quick. So I think that's one area, and that's probably another one from a an association standpoint where there's benefits is helping with some of those roadmaps, because it's really tough to try and keep it and make sure that you're in the right position.
That's good.
And when oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Debbie.
I would just, echo that and say that it kind of reminds me a little bit about my comment about sustainability, that it's the kind of thing that the smart building stuff is so much easier to do when you're building it than after you've built it. So doing it on a deferred basis is a lot more challenging than just doing it at the outset, even though it costs more at the outset. So we spend a lot of money retrofitting things to bring them up to standards, as opposed to, when we're building things to begin with. So we're trying to look at it from both spectrums. I realize that not everybody's building new, but as we're building new, we also need to make sure that we're putting in things that will last.
For us, the major area of how we do our renovations is the area of resiliency. We are trying to find whatever we can find in terms of resilient products. Because we are looking truly at that whole life cycle. It's not just about looking pretty for the first 5 years, it's looking pretty, 25 years from now, and how can withstand the rigor of people living there. The other side of it that we're looking at is the simplicity for our tenants. Not really looking for, the latest and greatest. We're never bleeding edge. We're not even the cutting edge. We're kind of like the thick part of the wedge. It's kind of where we're at. And we're trying to find things that are simple, intuitive to use for our tenants, that are not complicated in terms of how they live their lives. So that's an area for us to consider. The other side, going back to materials for building envelopes, especially in Calgary, like we go through 40, 50 degree changes within 24 hours. Like, I want to say almost every week now. It's kind of getting ridiculous. And a lot of the materials that we're seeing that the new products being made are not withstanding that level of quick temperature changes. So siding materials, building envelope construction to match that expansion, contraction speed. They're good for, they're good for -40, they're good to +40 over a transition of, a month or so. But, I think last week we went from 2 weeks ago, we went from -20 to +14 in 16 hours. And then a week later, it went from +12 to -32 in 24 hours. Like that kind of stuff just creates havoc left, right, and center for our buildings.
Wow.
That's good. Before we go into the close, Travis, do you want to add anything, or?
Yeah, I would just mention that we run into this a fair bit about the asset management community trying to push the envelope of what's out there. We certainly don't want to get in. There's industries out there. There's codes, there's requirements. That we're obligated to build to. Of course, we can always build over code. But you don't want to take on considerable liability on behalf of your client, to try out new technologies, new materials. There's always there's entire industries that are out there to prove invest and investigate and experiment with these things. And it is a bit of a cumbersome thing. Like, you look at some of the technologies that route, how long it takes technologies to get into the housing market, for instance. After they're out in the more of the private sector. And it's the patience. So I think we talked about risk already. Having the patience and just building within your means, and not overstepping your bounds when you're into these things, I think is also something that we need to appreciate.
No, it's a good thought. Okay, really appreciate everyone's contribution there. I think that's great. There are some other questions there I don't think we have time to tackle, and some of the questions I feel that you've already answered. So Hans, I'll pass it back to you and we can go into the closing thoughts here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Owen, and special thanks to all of you, Cliff, Travis, Debbie, and Bo, for your thoughts today, your time today, and your transparency just to share with us your asset management journey. Certainly take this opportunity to wish you the very best on a continued successful asset management journey. I'd like to thank all those participants that attended today. We do have a little survey that's going to be coming out, I believe Eric mentioned tomorrow, that you'll see in your email. So we really appreciate if you could respond to that. That really helps us tune these events and as we look down the road for new events. And speaking to that, we are planning for webinars for the balance of 2022. And we usually have about 3 to 4 webinars a year. These are pan-Canada. So that's one of the, I'm not going to say advantages of COVID. That's one of the results of COVID, if you will. But we did move to that last year. And it prior to that, we were having individual branch events, and then certainly our national conference on an annual basis. But if you have a topic that you would like to, kind of us to delve into, then I'd like to, just respond to that in the survey and make a note of that in the survey. There'll be opportunity for you to do that, and that will help us and our planning for the balance of 2022. So we do plan to have 3 or 4 events like this year, and so we're going to be planning, continuing our planning of that very, very shortly. So with that, I'd like to close this session this afternoon. And again, thank you to all participants. And we wish you the very best and a good evening to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Hi.
Yeah.